Rain lashed against the windows of the small creaking house as Eliza Mathers carefully unpacked her last box. The move had been impulsive, a desperate attempt to escape the city and the pressure of her failing art career. The house was a rental, cheap and tucked away in a quiet, forgotten corner of town. It wasn't much to look at, but it had space and silence. She needed both. Eliza wiped her hands on her jeans and glanced around. The living room was sparsely furnished with mismatched pieces left behind by previous tenants. The dim light bulb overhead flickered occasionally, casting unsettling shadows on the walls. It wasn't perfect, but it would do. As she leaned back against the couch, her gaze fell on the attic door. She had noticed it when she first toured the house, a narrow wooden panel set high in the hallway ceiling. The landlord had waved it off, claiming it was just storage for junk. But something about it tugged at her curiosity. Grabbing a flashlight, she pulled the cord, and the attic ladder creaked down like an old man rising from a deep sleep. Dust showered her face as she climbed, coughing into her sleeve. The attic was cold and musty, the air thick with the scent of forgotten things. Her flashlight beam swept across piles of boxes, old furniture, and an assortment of cobweb-covered knickknacks. Then she saw it. Tucked against the far wall, partially covered by a tattered sheet, was a large, ornate mirror. The frame was exquisite, intricately carved with swirling patterns that seemed to twist and writhe in the flashlight's beam. It was unlike anything Eliza had ever seen. Beautiful, yet oddly unsettling. She pulled the sheet off, her breath catching in her throat. The glass was perfectly smooth, not a speck of dust or a scratch marring its surface. But it wasn't just the mirror's condition that unnerved her. It was the faint shimmer beneath the glass, like a ripple of water just out of sight. "What are you doing up here?" she muttered to herself, as if the mirror might answer. She carefully dragged it down the attic stairs and into the living room. Its presence was magnetic, impossible to ignore. She set it against the far wall, staring at her own reflection. Her face looked pale in the dim light, her dark eyes sunken from too many sleepless nights. But as she turned to leave, something caught her attention. She whipped around, her heart pounding. The reflection wasn't quite right. It wasn't wrong either, but for a split second, she could have sworn her mirrored self hesitated before moving with her. She blinked hard, shaking her head. It had to be her imagination, just her mind playing tricks in the dim light. That night, as she lay in bed, her mind kept drifting back to the mirror. Something about it felt alive. She tried to push the thought away, convincing herself it was just her exhaustion, the stress of moving, the weight of her failing career. But deep down, a part of her knew there was something unnatural about it. At 3:13 a.m., she woke with a start. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic tapping of rain against the windows. But something else was there, faint and almost imperceptible. A soft whisper, like the murmur of a distant conversation. It was coming from the living room. Eliza froze, her breath catching in her throat. She told herself it was the wind, maybe a branch scraping against the house. But as she sat up, she realized the sound was distinct, human, and it was coming from the mirror. Eliza's heart pounded as the whispers continued, soft and rhythmic, like a lullaby sung just out of reach. She told herself it was her imagination, the exhaustion of the move. But the sound persisted. Gathering what courage she could, she grabbed the flashlight from her nightstand and crept toward the living room. The house felt colder than it had earlier, the wooden floors creaking under her bare feet. She stopped just short of the doorway, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. The whispers were louder now, distinct yet indecipherable, coming from the mirror. She took a step inside. The room was dimly lit by the glow of the streetlight outside, its pale light barely touching the edges of the mirror. Eliza hesitated, her breath visible in the chill air. The whispers stopped the moment she entered, plunging the room into an unsettling silence. Her reflection stared back at her, wide-eyed and trembling. For a moment everything seemed normal, and she felt a wave of relief. But then, the shimmer in the glass returned, faint and undulating, as though the mirror itself were breathing. Eliza, her name, whispered from the mirror. She stumbled backward, her flashlight clattering to the floor. The sound had been clear, impossibly clear. She looked around the room, half expecting someone to be there, hiding in the shadows. But she was alone. Eliza. The voice came again, softer this time, almost pleading. Against her better judgment, she stepped closer to the mirror, her trembling hand reaching out to touch the cold glass. Her reflection stared back at her. But something was wrong. The eyes weren't quite her own. They were darker, deeper, as though they belonged to someone else. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The shimmer in the mirror grew brighter, and for a moment she saw something move behind her reflection. A shadow, faint and fleeting. She spun around, but the room was empty. When she turned back to the mirror, her reflection smiled. Eliza's blood ran cold. She hadn't smiled. Her lips were pressed tightly together, her breath shallow with fear. But the figure in the mirror, her mirror self, stood there grinning, a twisted, knowing smile that didn't belong to her. "Eliza, you brought me home," the reflection said, the voice soft but filled with an unsettling familiarity. She stumbled backward, her legs giving out as she fell to the floor. The voice in the mirror continued, calm and deliberate. "I've been waiting for so long. You're the one who found me. You're the one who can set me free." Eliza scrambled to her feet, her hands shaking as she backed away. "What are you? What do you want?" The reflection tilted its head, the smile fading into something more neutral. "I'm part of you, and you're part of me. I'm what you've hidden. I'm what you need to become." Before Eliza could respond, the shimmer in the glass grew brighter, and her reflection returned to normal. Her own wide-eyed, terrified face stared back at her, and the room fell silent again. She stood there for several minutes, her mind racing. Her rational side screamed at her to leave, to run from the house and never look back. But another part of her, a deeper, quieter voice, compelled her to stay. That night, sleep eluded her. The mirror's words haunted her thoughts. "You brought me home, set me free." By morning, she resolved to learn more about the house, the mirror, and whatever or whoever was inside it. Eliza sat at the kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee as the morning sun weakly filtered through the curtains. She hadn't slept, her mind consumed by the voice, the smile, and the impossible reflection in the mirror. Every time she thought about leaving, something stopped her, a gnawing curiosity, or perhaps the faintest whisper still echoing in her mind. "Set me free." She decided she couldn't leave, not yet. She needed answers. Eliza pulled out her laptop and began searching for information about the house. The listing had mentioned it was built in the 1890s, and the landlord had made passing comments about its quirky history. After an hour of scrolling through online archives, she found an article dated from 1932. Her stomach tightened as she read the headline. "Local heiress found dead in family estate. No suspects named in tragic case." The accompanying photograph showed a young woman standing in front of the very house Eliza now lived in. Her features were sharp and striking, her dark eyes filled with an intensity that felt unnervingly familiar. Her name was Cecilia Marrow. the last surviving member of the Marrow family. She'd been discovered in the attic, her body lifeless in front of a shattered mirror. Eliza's hands trembled as she scrolled further. The article mentioned rumors of Cecilia dabbling in the occult, her obsession with mirrors, and whispers of seances she had conducted in secret. It was said she believed mirrors could act as gateways to hidden truths and other realms. Cecilia, Eliza murmured, her voice catching. Was this the voice she had heard, the figure in the mirror? She found another article from decades later, detailing the sale of the estate after years of abandonment. The house had changed hands many times, often sitting vacant for years in between occupants. There were vague mentions of disturbances, sounds, shadows, objects moving on their own, but nothing concrete. Each new owner left without explanation, unwilling to speak of their experiences. Determined to learn more, Eliza returned to the attic, where she'd first found the mirror. The air felt heavier this time, colder, as though the space were holding its breath. She searched through the piles of forgotten belongings, her fingers brushing over dusty books and moth-eaten fabrics. In one corner, she found a wooden trunk, its brass hinges tarnished with age. The lid creaked as she opened it, revealing a collection of faded photographs, brittle letters, and a leather-bound journal. The journal's cover was embossed with the initials C.M. Eliza sat cross-legged on the attic floor, carefully opening the journal. The first few pages were filled with elegant handwriting, Cecilia's thoughts spilling out in neat lines. Most entries spoke of her loneliness after her parents' deaths, her increasing fascination with mirrors, and her belief that they held answers to questions no one dares to ask. One entry, dated just days before Cecilia's death, sent a shiver down Eliza's spine. The mirror speaks now. Its voice is faint, but growing stronger. It shows me what I could become, the life I could have, if I only let it in. I feel it pulling me closer, promising freedom, power, and release from this empty existence. But I fear what it might take from me in return. The words struck too close to home. Eliza slammed the journal shut, her breath quickening. Cecilia had been hearing the same voice, feeling the same pull. As she stood to leave, a loud creak echoed through the attic. She froze, turning slowly toward the mirror still propped against the wall. It wasn't glowing or shimmering this time. Instead, its surface was dull and gray, like smoke swirling just beneath the glass. Eliza? Her name came again, softer this time, almost tender. She didn't move. You found her journal. You know what happened. But you're not her. The voice was calm, deliberate, and uncomfortably familiar, like an echo of her own. The gray smoke within the glass began to swirl faster, taking shape. For a split second, she thought she saw Cecilia's face staring back at her, the same sharp features from the photograph. But when the smoke cleared, it was her own reflection, smiling again, that same knowing, unnatural smile. You can finish what she started, the reflection said. Set me free. Eliza stumbled backward, her heart pounding as the smile in the mirror lingered. She clutched Cecilia's journal to her chest, the words she had just read swirling in her mind. The reflection seemed to study her, tilting its head with an expression that felt disturbingly alive. Set you free, she whispered. What does that even mean? The mirror rippled, the surface shimmering as though it were water. Her reflection's mouth moved, but the voice seemed to come from all around her. Cecilia couldn't do it, but you can. You're stronger. The voice was soothing, almost melodic, and it sent a chill down her spine. Eliza wanted to look away, to run from the attic and the oppressive presence of the mirror, but something held her in place. What are you? She asked, her voice trembling. "I am you," the reflection said, smiling faintly. "The part of you you've ignored, your potential, your ambition, the greatness you've buried beneath doubt." Eliza shook her head, backing toward the attic stairs. "No, you're just a trick, a hallucination." The reflection's smile faded, replaced by an expression of almost human disappointment. "Do you really believe that?" "You've felt me, Eliza. In every brushstroke, in every moment you've doubted your work. I'm the voice that pushes you, and I'm the one who can make you whole." The words struck a nerve. Eliza's art had been stagnant for months, her confidence shattered by rejection after rejection. She had come to this house hoping for inspiration, for a chance to start over. And now, here was this impossible thing, this mirror, offering her exactly what she wanted. But at what cost? "How?" she asked, despite herself. "How would you make me whole?" The mirror shimmered again, and for a moment, the reflection changed. It wasn't Eliza anymore, but a version of her. Taller, radiant, exuding confidence. This Eliza stood in a sunlit gallery, surrounded by people admiring her work and hanging on her every word. The vision disappeared as quickly as it came, leaving her own pale, tired face staring back at her. "Everything you want is within reach," the voice said. "I can show you how. All I need is your trust. Let me in." Eliza felt her pulse quicken. The offer was intoxicating, but her mind reeled with doubt. What happens if I do? What's the cost? The reflection hesitated, its expression turning somber. "There is always a cost," it admitted, "but it's a small price to pay for the life you've always dreamed of." Eliza's hands trembled as she lowered the journal. She knew she should walk away, but she couldn't. The mirror's presence was magnetic, pulling her closer despite the fear coursing through her veins. "What do I have to do?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The reflection's smile returned, slow and deliberate. "It's simple. You just need to say yes. Say yes, and I'll guide you." Her lips parted, but she couldn't bring herself to speak. Her instincts screamed at her to stop, to leave the attic and never look back. But the image of her radiant, successful self lingered in her mind, tempting her. Before she could make a decision, the sound of shattering glass echoed through the house. Eliza spun around, her heart racing. The sound came from the living room. Clutching the flashlight, she hurried down the attic stairs, the whispers from the mirror fading into silence as she descended. When she reached the living room, her breath caught. The small mirror above the fireplace had shattered, its shards scattered across the floor. But what stopped her cold was what she saw in the largest shard. Her reflection wasn't there. Instead, Cecilia's face stared back at her, her dark eyes piercing, her mouth moving soundlessly as though screaming a warning. The air grew colder, and the faint scent of flowers, old and decayed, filled the room. Behind her, she felt the unmistakable sensation of someone watching. She turned, but no one was there. "Eliza." The voice came again, softer now, almost a plea. "Don't let her win." Eliza's knees buckled as the weight of it all hit her. There wasn't just one voice, there were two, one in the mirror promising greatness, and another warning her of its dangers. Her choice wasn't just about trust. It was about who to trust. Eliza sat on the cold floor of the living room, staring at the shattered mirror shards scattered around her. Cecilia's face lingered in the jagged reflection of the largest shard, her mouth moving as if screaming, though no sound came through. Behind her, the faint whispering voice from the attic tugged at the edges of her mind, seductive and insistent. She was caught between two forces, one offering her everything she had ever wanted, and another warning her of a cost she couldn't yet comprehend. The weight of the choice pressed down on her like a vice. "Eliza," the whisper from the attic called again, softer now, almost a lullaby. "You're wasting time. You deserve this. You've always deserved this." Her gaze flicked to the shard on the floor. Cecilia's face was gone now, replaced by her own distorted reflection. Her breathing quickened as a faint creak came from the attic, as though the mirror upstairs was shifting, restless. "Don't let her win." The voice from earlier whispered again, clear and close, as though someone were standing behind her. Eliza spun around, but the room was empty. The air was icy, and the faint smell of decayed flowers lingered. Summoning her courage, Eliza stood and made her way back to the attic. The pull of the mirror grew stronger with every step, the whispers growing louder and more urgent. By the time she reached the attic, the voice in her mind had transformed into a chorus, soothing and persuasive. When she entered, the mirror's surface was no longer smooth. It rippled like water, its glow brighter than before. Her reflection stood in the center, perfect and radiant, the ideal version of herself she had glimpsed earlier. "I can make it real," the reflection said. "I can give you everything you've dreamed of. Just say yes." Eliza hesitated, her hands trembling. "What are you? Really? What happens if I say yes?" The reflection smiled, and for the first time it seemed vulnerable. "I am you, Eliza, the part of you that can rise above doubt and fear. All I ask is your trust. Let me in, and you'll never feel small again." Eliza's chest tightened. The offer was so tempting, so easy, but the memory of Cecilia's face in the broken mirror haunted her. "What had happened to Cecilia?" she demanded. "You promised her the same thing, didn't you?" The reflection's smile faltered, and the glow of the mirror dimmed slightly. She hesitated too long. She gave in to fear. Don't let her failure become yours. "Failure?" The voice in her mind shifted, sounding angry now, urgent. Or was it a trap? Eliza's grip on Cecilia's journal tightened. She flipped through its pages, searching for answers. Toward the back, scrawled in frantic, uneven handwriting, was the final entry. "The mirror lies. It promised me everything, but now it demands more than I can give. I see it in my dreams, in my reflection. It's consuming me. If you find this, don't listen to it. Destroy it before it's too late." Her blood ran cold as she reread the final words. "Destroy it before it's too late." "Eliza," the voice from the mirror said, sharper now, "don't let her fear poison you. She was weak. You're not." The reflection reached toward her from within the glass, its hand pressing against the surface. For a moment, Eliza felt a surge of warmth and power, like electricity rushing through her veins. But as she stared, she noticed something she hadn't before. Her reflection's eyes weren't hers. They were dark, almost black, and filled with something that felt wrong. "Hungry. Don't do this," the faint voice from earlier whispered again, clearer now. Cecilia wasn't weak. She fought it. You can, too. Eliza stepped closer to the mirror, her breath fogging the shimmering glass. The warmth from the mirror grew stronger, inviting, and the whispers in her mind reached a fever pitch. She raised her hand, hovering it just above the glass. Her reflection smiled, triumphant. "You only have to say yes." But the journal's words burned in her mind. "Destroy it before it's too late." Eliza's other hand clenched around the flashlight she had carried with her since the night before. She glanced at the heavy base, its weight reassuring. The mirror rippled, sensing her hesitation. "Eliza, don't listen to them. They want you to fail. You deserve this." She gritted her teeth, the chorus of voices in her head battling for control. The radiant version of herself in the mirror, the warning from Cecilia, the promise of everything she'd ever wanted. With a guttural cry, she swung the flashlight at the mirror. The glass shattered, exploding into a storm of jagged shards that flew in every direction. The whispers turned to screams, the glowing light bursting outward before fading into nothingness. Eliza stumbled back, shielding her face, her heart hammering in her chest. When the room fell silent, she dared to open her eyes. The mirror was gone, reduced to fragments scattered across the attic floor. The oppressive weight that had filled the house was lifted, replaced by an eerie stillness. She knelt to pick up one of the shards, expecting to see her reflection, but the glass was empty, its surface dull and lifeless. A faint sigh echoed through the attic, and for a moment she thought she heard Cecilia's voice. "Thank you." In the days that followed, Eliza felt different, lighter. The mirror was gone, and so were the voices, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching her. The perfect version of herself still lingered in her mind, a reminder of what she had rejected. She packed the journal away and left it in the attic, locking the door behind her. The house was quieter now, but every so often, when the light hit the glass of her windows just right, she thought she saw a flicker, a faint shimmer, like a ripple of water. And in those moments, she swore she heard the whisper again, next time. The end.